Well, good morning, students. It's Mr. Verzat. Today I'm going to give you guys another lesson on isoparms. I'm going to show you guys a couple of fun little tricks and we'll make several of them together. So what you see me doing right now is I haven't exactly drawn on a Wacom tablet on a regular basis for a while now. I've been doing mostly traditional work with the 2D students. I'm a little rusty, so this is warm-up. So I'm just getting my arm ready to go. And before we go any further, check this out. If you want your line art to not look like this, or wobbly, one of the things you can do is to have your hand on the keyboard and lock your wrist with the stylus, use your elbow, drop a line using your whole arm. Now this is your sledgehammer. This is not like precision work. That's when you use your fingers and your wrist. But I'm also hitting Command Z to get rid of the strokes that I don't want. So if you're drawing and you're trying to get a detail in here that you really want to look good, and just isn't quite working, this is one of the ways that you can do it. So it's very, very helpful. It's way faster than going in, making a mistake, erasing, trying again, doing the ugly chicken scratch. You know, it just really helps you to build confidence. You commit to a single stroke, and eventually you'll warm your body up to the point where, oh yeah, good. After 3 or 4 hits, you'll drop what you want. Also, another way to help you do this is to ghost. So if you want to kind of get a feel for what's going to happen, ghost first and then drop. And see right there, had success. All right, so let's talk isoparms. So those are basically just cross contours. And a cross contour is this, where you've got a contour line that crosses over a form. And it's the consistency of that crossing that will tell the viewer's brain that there is something happening there. So the actual form that I'm drawing is here. Okay, it's this strange form. If we look at like the consistency of the curves, this is the overall shape of the thing I'm trying to draw. And it's by crossing over that that you're telling the viewer information on what parts rise up. And so for example, this would be a positive, this would be a negative. And so we're going to take it another level, is rather instead of going across, we're also going to go intersect vertically and try to see what is going on these forms here. Like so. So I'm not just drawing straight lines, I'm following the curve. So here, 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 and here, you know, that would be the topography of where the form starts to, starts to curve away. So that means if I intersected it, I would draw a line that goes like that. But how do you know when to do that? Well, it comes down to three-dimensional thinking, use of perspective. And so let's start with a basic couple of shapes that we can use as, let's say, like a pear shape. So I'm going to stack 2 forms on top of each other, and you likely learned this in 2D or any other foundations class, where you can pretty much draw anything in the world as long as you break it into basic shapes. So we could make this into a pear. See what I mean? And by understanding those basic shapes, you can draw that pear. Like if we look down on it, here's what the pear would look like by looking down on it. That skill is definitely required in order to be able to do this. So I'm going to make, let's go back to basics. So let's take a cylinder, and we're going to talk about form lines. So looking at this cylinder, it is going away from us into the distance. See? So we have, just like from your perspective, we got 2 lines of convergence going off to a vanishing point. And this outside edge of the cylinder creates these form lines, and they go away from us like that. So likewise, if we're looking at a cylinder and it's going away from us and down, you know, looking at this line here is going to indicate what's going to be going on with the form. Our cut lines will go that way as well. And what is basically happening here is I'm just repeating this oval inside of the form as it goes away from us, and we're just selectively using these visible lines on the outside of the surface. Those are form or cut lines, and that helps us really define those cross contours. So we take this pear, and we start with a circle, and then another circle, and let's say it's flat in perspective. There's like no 3D going up or down or anything. It's still a 3-dimensional form. So for example, this fellow right here is like a globe, okay? You know, like that. Those are some of the things that you think about. So step 1 is, no matter what you're drawing, try to think of it in terms of actual 3D forms. So if I were to map this out, imagine that you're draping a spaghetti noodle over this, and this spaghetti noodle is fitting right along the edges of this form here. What would that spaghetti noodle do as it wraps around the surface of this form? And likewise, what if you're going to wrap one around like the equator of it? Slice this into pieces. Well, it's going to curve on the outside like a cylinder, like this. And so now we've just taken this strange flat couple of discs and we've just translated it into 3D. Let's do it again. Here would be the top, okay? And so again, go right down the middle. And it's pretty much the same thing, except these are originating from a center area. Just imagine if you're going to drape a spaghetti noodle over the top of this, what would happen? And then follow that individual line. So here we're not going to see much. Here it's going to bulge out that way. This fella is going to go whoop. This guy like that, and out. Okay? And then we need to do the equator shapes. So there's not going to be any flat equators because remember, we're looking down on it. So I'm going to follow these curves here and just imagine if they were in sections. So that means here you would have a nice disc shape and it would get larger here. Let's do the exact same thing. Let's draw through and find the top of this big guy right here. Let's go even more extreme. All right, so here's that center point. So here's the middle of the form. Our section lines are going to be very, very not as flat and compressed. So it means, like, even if you look at like here, 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 and here, where the form starts to really curve, that is a pretty broad angle that we're working with here. And one of the other things that you want to pay attention to is where does the form start to turn under? So about here is where it starts to really turn away from the light, and so you'd think about that when you shade. And so that's just kind of how the three-dimensional thinking goes into play. And by understanding this, then we could light this, apply light to it because it sits in three-dimensional space. We can pick any light source that we want, so let's do that. There we go. So just get a nice mid-tone. I'm going to Command H to hide the marching ants. Let's just get a soft edged brush and go in here and start to paint. Let's light this bad boy from, say, the top left. And then we can hit it with some bounce light over here on the outside, opposite of where the light's coming from, following the direction that the light is going. Another fun thing, if you want, before adding actual black to it, you could go to Image, Adjustments, and Levels. That's Command L. And we can go down here, and then we can bump the dark and the light, bring the arrows up to the base of the histogram here, and that suddenly increases the contrast. And so from a distance, we just lit this form. So that's why isoparms really help, because whatever you're drawing, whether it's like a bicep, the ear of an elephant, a machine gun, a car, anything, you need to understand how your form sits in three-dimensional space. Feel for things. So we're going to go off into the distance, and you see I'm going to just define my outside edge here. Let's define the outside here, and then the important lines, okay? So right now, you can already see these natural cut lines forming. I'm just being selective. I'm taking the curves that I want, and that is really indicated that I'm looking down and away, so my curves are going to be going convex out. Let's do a really weird one. Let's do a very irregular shape. And this looks like a croissant coming straight at us in the camera. So the next step is to think center. Where's the middle of this thing? And finding center can be a bit of a challenge. You just get in there with your imagination and you really try to think, hey, in 3D, how would that center line be foreshortened? So let's take a look at an organic form in nature that has symmetry. Symmetry means that it's pretty much the same on both sides. And I like to start with beetles and bugs when teaching isoparms mainly because beetles have a natural center line that goes right down their back, right over here. They also, like especially ladybugs, they have these two major shapes here, and we can infer from the drawing through foreshortening and just looking at the perspective of the shot that center line would be right about there. Likewise, center line in the middle. So this really gives us a feel for when we're looking down on something at, say, like a 3/4 angle. So we can look directly at the ladybug, and we've got this seam that goes right down the bottom here, and then it goes over like this, and then down again, and we can infer that again through the markings that we've got here. I'm going to turn my line down, and you see just kind of following these curves. Center is not here. It's not here. You see, we follow these outside angles here, and just like the spine of an animal, this would be center, and it would disappear behind this form. And so let's also try to find center going the other way. One thing that's helpful is to do this for a couple of different areas, and you see the angle of my line, I'm curving it. And I like to, with irregular shapes like this, imagine that you've got a shoelace and you're just going to drape it over, or a spaghetti noodle, and you're just going to drape it over this thing. What would that little fella do if you draped it over this form? And we can also get some clues from this outside edge. It's going to have kind of a sharp edge that comes this way, and that's about where the form starts to turn under, away from us. So we'll need to really kind of think about that. We've also got these gentle curves here that we need to consider as well. So that means if I go over here to do my section line, my spaghetti noodle is going to come out and then curve under. I'm not tracing these little tornado shapes that I made, you can notice. Those just kind of help my mind think in terms of 3D, all right? Tornadoes are a great way to start, especially if you draw them lightly. And now, so what do we do with like these other cross-contour intersections here? So again, I'm paying attention to this area where it's starting to turn under, so that would be a great place for one. And that would follow this curve and curve around in the front. And then we just start to slice it up in sections. Let's do the exact same thing here. Come down, curve over in front, come down, curve right there. Be mindful of the symmetry here. Likewise, when it starts to curve under here, and then we've got the outside of the form right there. So if we do a top-down view, we would have a form that looks something like this. Here's the nose, here's the nose. Here's center line, here's center line. Likewise, what would this look like from the side? Well, it's generally flat on the bottom, generally, and it's going to rise up in the back. So flat on the bottom, it's going to rise up in the back, broad curve on the top, and it looks like about halfway through the shape is when it reaches the top, and then it slants down, and then it has a nose on the end. So that's pretty much what this form would look like from the side. So here would be your center line, and then here would be your equator right there. And each one of these lines that we're drawing is sectioning this form out like that. And each one of these lines that we're drawing, just like chopping up a vegetable, is slicing it as well. So that's how those cross contours work to help define the form out. You can see these leaf-like shapes, and even what the light is doing, like right here, is where the form is starting to turn under from us. So we could have a form line here, and hopefully that's a helpful way to indicate how you would start to lay your form lines out in a piece. So if we go to section them out, we look back here at the back end of his form, and we can also tell that it's likely that that same exact thing is happening here. So we would go up, it's round on the top and disappears over the edge. Up, rounds over the top, and disappears over the edge. Do you see the form here is starting to turn around from us? Meaning if we had these contours, it would start to turn away, like the edges of a coin when they turn away from the viewer in foreshortening. So for the head, right over here, we could do an intersection there, go around, go over, up, over, and down, over, down, up, over, and down. For complex forms, all you do is you treat each individual component as if it's its own isoparm shape as well. So we can find center down the middle and center down the equator this way. It rounds about over here, goes over and down, over and down. So starting with bugs is a huge help for doing this. I'm just going to start stacking some shapes on top of each other. So we'll probably stack a little rock on top of this rock here. Let's put a rock right about here on the ground, and then maybe a big one right in front of it. And using these shapes, try to stretch your brain to see which shapes are in front of the other and how that'll change the symmetry. Let's use these forms to create a brand new isoparm type blob. So the form, again, looking at this form that's underneath the surface here, I see it go out. There's a little bulge here, and then it connects to this area and then wraps around. So we would see vertical here. This area, it would start to go back, and once it reaches this point, now these are globes now, these are 3D, so it would look like that. And there'd be a pebble directly on the top, so it would come over like so. Not really see the top too much. Let's get an equator in there somewhere. And remember, these are all curving as if they were cut lines, like that. And there we go. Let's light it. Let's light this guy using a hard edge brush and see what happens. Yeah, so this is very loose, very rough, but it shows how you can get a good indication of value even with a hard edge brush with rough, sloppy lines. And I hope you guys noticed, but the curvature of the form, the direction that those grid lines were going, that helped me to make a decision on what direction my brush would go to conform to the 3D curvature of the outside forms and such. So hopefully this is a fun little exercise where you combine multiple little pebble shapes and make strange looking blobs out of them.